Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Comicsly podcast. Thank you for joining us for episode number 36. On this episode, we are going to be discussing season 2, part 2 of Community, or I should say Community season 2, part 2. That is going to be episodes, I believe it's 13 through 25. It is all of the episodes after Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas. This is a really good episode. We were excited to talk about this part of the season. There's some really good stuff in here. To give a content warning, right? There's some very good episodes in here, but in these episodes, content warning, there is a discussion of suicide and depression. So just know that that is going to be part of one of the episodes that we talk about. Yeah, these are some great episodes of Community. I think this is, I don't know if this is like the most positive we've been about it on the show, right? And we're always kind of really positive about Community, but I think Angela and I had a really, really fun time recording this episode because there's just so much great, funny stuff to talk about it that I'm sure that there is. You know, we could record this episode again. It would be totally different. We could talk about things that we didn't even mention or bring up in this episode because it's so jam-packed. One thing I want to say before we get to our conversation is that there is a little bit of microphone popping. I did my best in the edit to eliminate it or silence it as best I could, but it does show up at a few points. So if you hear that as we're talking, just know I tried my best and we're sorry about that. But without too much more for me, hope you really enjoy this conversation of Community Season 2, Part 2, and you're going to hear that right after this short break. Did you rewatch these episodes, or are we going off of memory?
I got up. Okay, I was in the middle of watching the one where Shirley had the baby.
Oh, nice. Oh, you got very close to the end. There's only...
But I know it's just the paintball one.
Yeah, it's just paintball, yeah.
It's just paintball.
What are your...
I still like it.
It's still good. Community's still good.
Funny.
I think when we ended the last time, right, we talked a little bit about some of the sort of themes that were coming out. One of them was like looking at how Troy, right, how it's doing like a platonic male friendship, how the show is portraying that, and how that's developing. We talked a little bit about Troy sort of becoming a little bit more bolder in the group, taking a little bit more of a leadership role. I think something that we worried about a little bit is, because if you remember when we talked about the second half of season 1, how that season really led into relationship stuff between Jeff, Britta, Annie, and Professor Slater. So I don't know, what were like, did you any like themes or patterns sort of stand out to you as you went through these episodes? What did you kind of maybe notice that you hadn't noticed before, or what, kind of piqued your interest or things like that?
I guess, I don't know. I wasn't like noticing anything, but I guess like with Pierce and like his character and whatever.
Yeah.
I was just like, what makes this funny?
Yeah, well, talk to me about what you're like, what episodes you're thinking about, or is there anything specific coming to mind with that?
Just his like dumb one-liners, and like his like, and then of course there was the one where he pretends he's dying. Mm-hmm. But I think more so with his one-liners, because like sometimes I actually was like, I breathed quickly out of my nose sometimes when he would say them, just because I was like, oh, it's so stupid. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I don't know if I'm just turning into a bad person or if it's just like I'm becoming more like I'm taking it less seriously and just being like, this character is awful.
No, I think they really lean into it, right? I don't know. I mean, you can tell me what you think about this. I don't know if it feels like a completely new character, but it feels very much like they had an endpoint they wanted to get to in paintball. Do you remember what happens at the end of that paintball episode?
Remind me.
Where Pierce sort of sets up the safe zone, and then he tries to backstab them, but then in the end he actually is the one who wins the paintball game, and he wins like $100,000 and he gives it back to Greendale. But like they're in this place where they're not sure if they can trust him. And at the start of that episode, you see a flashback to the group taking a vote of whether or not they're going to invite him back next year.
Oh, forgot about it.
Yeah. So it feels kind of like, okay, we have this endpoint we want to get to. We had these episodes in the first half where like he kind of ruins Jeff and Abed's jumping on the trampoline. He breaks his legs. He gets addicted to painkillers, but he's just kind of like goofy old guy. And like when you say like the one-liners, you feel like it got stupider. Do you feel like it got like maybe sinister? Like sinister is probably the wrong word, but just more like mean. Do you feel like he got more mean?
Yeah, like more like bitter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think bitter is probably a really good. Yeah, I think bitter is probably a really good word. And it's a pretty like quick switch, right? Because just going through some of those first episodes, right? In episode 13, when they're doing the play, he's the one who kind of like he's the one who kind of ruins the play, right?
Yeah.
With Annie, I think episode 14, Dungeons and Dragons, is a big like kind of standout. Or right, that's kind of a big one in this group of episodes where like, oh, Pierce is really he just is a villain. He's literally a villain in that episode. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then he has the thing where he overdoses on the pills. He goes to the hospital and manipulates all of them. Like they just turned him into like they turned him into something that he wasn't. That like at least up to this point. I don't know. Did you find that like interesting, or maybe it sounds like you found that a little bit distracting, or like how do you did that like color the way you watched the second half did that color your impression of these episodes?
I feel like when I would watch it in the past, I'd be like, wow, they're making Pierce awful. I hate it. But I think watching it now, I was just like, I know where this is going. Let's just like enjoy it and take it in like the writers intended. You know, I feel like I was taking it less like seriously, I guess. Because I was like, well, I know that he's gonna be gone and replaced or whatever. And like, I didn't feel as like attached.
I don't know enough about the production of this show, but I don't think they knew they were going to write him off the show at this point.
Really?
Right? Because the thing about Community is like they didn't know until the season ended, right? Every single season, they didn't know until it ended if they were going to be able to do the next season, right? So like they had to sort of, whatever they were going to do or whatever they wanted to do, they had to do it in that season, right? So I think if they wanted to get rid of Pierce, like they would have just done it, right? I guess I'm not really sure. I guess I'm kind of like you. Like when I think about these episodes, like you think about the Dungeons and Dragons episodes, right? Like that's kind of one of the favorite episodes of Community of you know, generally people love that episode, and you like, oh yeah, Pierce is like this really bad guy, right? But then when you watch this second half of the season, right, everything after the Christmas episode, and you're like, oh, there's the Dungeons and Dragons one, there's the pills plot arc, there's the paintball, there's him in the play, and it sort of adds up, and it's like, oh, they were trying to like do something with Pierce here. They really, I don't know if they felt like the group needed an antagonist or they just needed something to sort of motivate everyone else around, because it does end in this like, yeah, it ends in the paintball one in this weird thing where he betrays them, but he ends up doing the right thing in the end, but they're still not sort of sure if they can trust him, and it's not clear if he's coming back to the group. So, I mean, I think maybe you're right in that they wanted to get to a place where like him being involved was ambiguous, right? Even if they didn't say we're getting rid of him directly, which we know that will end up being the case, they wanted to end up in a place where like, well, maybe he won't come back. But when you put it all together, it feels like a lot. Yeah, I had was there another question about that? Well, so there's, and maybe we kind of just like answered this, or we already just kind of like answered this, because at one point, one of the characters, I think Annie and Jeff are talking, and they're like, I think Jeff says we exclude him because he like acts out and is mean, and Annie's like, he acts out and is mean because we exclude him, right? And like, I don't know, do you feel like the show, what do you think like the show thinks of Pierce? Like, do you think it thinks of him as like do you think it thinks of him more like a villain, or do you think he's just like problematic old guy? Like, do you think the show has an opinion on him by the end of this?
Yeah, I feel like it's more towards villain, because like I know a lot of old people. No one acts like that.
Pierce is a one of a kind, and it's gonna get like, yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked too much into the production of this, but they're really going to sort of, just looking ahead with the like whole Buddhist like laser lotus thing, they're really going to kind of turn him into a bit of an idiot, right? Like he might not be an out and out bad guy, but they're really going to turn him into a little bit of a moron. Do you agree with that kind of, or?
Yeah.
So yeah, they end it with Pierce in this place where it's kind of ambiguous whether or not he's going to come back, and then we'll talk some more about the production stuff in Pierce, how what happens between him and Dan Harmon in later seasons. I haven't really looked into that stuff because I don't think it matters yet, other than the fact that like after season 1 they weren't sure if they were going to come back, after season 2 they weren't sure if they were going to come back, and that's going to continue for the rest of it. So like I think we can kind of think of these seasons as like they had to make the thing they wanted to make in that season because they didn't know if they were going to get something else.
Yeah.
That's kind of the big, like, I mean, so you talking about Pierce, that's the thing that like, that was the thing I was going to say, right? It feels very obvious and sort of like overshadowing kind of these whole group of episodes. But I have some questions here, but let's just talk through what are some of our like, what are your, some of our favorite episodes from this group?
I would say I like the drug one. Thought that was pretty funny. Obviously Dungeons and Dragons, and I like the paintball ones.
You like the paintball ones?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons first, because I think that people like, people point to certain episodes when they talk about why Community is great. Dungeons and Dragons, Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas, a couple in season 3. But yeah, what about Dungeons and Dragons? Like I have a couple things here that I'm like, I sort of picked out that I think makes Community special. But what about this episode? Like, you're not a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, so what about this episode works?
Hey, I am a big Dungeons and Dragons.
Have you played
fan.
Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Oh, you have?
Yes.
Oh, I did not know that.
Not only once, but yes.
Okay, you can still be a fan, but what appeals to you about this episode? What works well for you?
Let me pull up what happened again. I just remember I liked it. I don't really remember what happened. Sorry. Oh yeah, I liked that was one with Neil in it, right? Yeah, that's
the one with Neil. Yeah.
I just liked that Neil was in it. It was like interesting because it was sort of like you got to sort of see the group with like an outsider in it. And I think it was nice that everyone was sort of going along with it, except for Pierce, obviously.
I think that's a really good point, right? It is the group having to sort of adjust to an outsider, right? And like, if I'm thinking about that, like, those are some of my favorite, like, we think about the Jack Black episode in season 1, like, that's one of my favorite episodes, right? I think this show does really well often because they know who each of those characters are so well, when they like bring another person in, they're so confident in who everyone is already that they can really like play around and have fun with the way that they react to that person. It's also like secretly a super dark episode because Neil literally gives away all his Dungeons and Dragons stuff and is like, I'm gonna commit suicide. Like, that's in this episode. I guess I should put a content warning at the beginning of this, but it also, I think the thing that Community often does, right, and this one does a really good job, right? It's a super fun episode, right? If you think about even just like the names they come up with for the characters, and like Abed being annoyed that like Troy didn't get the character he made for him, or like Annie having to like describe how to make love with the goblin or whatever, that Abed's character, and like Troy pulls out his like notepad and he's like taking notes, and like, I don't know, it figures out a like way to have fun while dealing with something that's really serious, and like everyone's perfectly in character at every moment. Like it's amazing how they balance to like manage to do that. I think of this one in like a little bit of conversation with the episode where they all go to the bar, just because like that one was dealing with like, well, I guess maybe I think of that one in conversation with different episode, but just in terms of like some of the darker thematic tones, and they're a little bit out of their comfort zone, right? They're like, they're on a Saturday, they're with a person they don't know, they're doing something they don't normally do, and how everyone reacts to that. And again, you see sort of Jeff and Britta kind of they're always themselves, and they are both kind of selfish, right? Just in the way like Jeff can't get on board and Britta wants to make it about like goblin rights or whatever, and it ends up being kind of fun and ridiculous, but like, yeah, they're always just kind of themselves in like the funniest way possible, I guess. Yeah, one of the ones that stuck out for me, I liked the I don't know. There's like, I guess I think that's probably my favorite episode from this group. I think it's probably the most fun one. I do really like the drugs episode. I also really like the episode 12 when they're picking out, that's when they find out what happened on Halloween and they're picking out a new group member. And it's kind of Chang sort of becomes this like eighth wheel for the group, which he's going to kind of fill that role for the rest of the season. But I think I like this because I love how unreasonably mad Jeff gets when Rich is around. I think this might be the last time we see Rich. Does he show up again?
I don't remember.
I think it might be the last time we see Rich. I don't know if he shows up after this. I know there's Subway, but Subway and Rich are different people. But yeah, I think this might be the last time we see Rich. But we also get Shirley's husband, Andre. Did you have any thoughts about like his inclusion in this second half of the season, or like how he fit into everything?
I didn't really care about him, to be honest.
How do you think he... At some point I was like, why is this grown man like hanging around a community college?
Yeah. It's weird that like all of these people hang out together. Like, why is this guy who's like, you don't even have to be here?
Yeah, I don't think he's enrolled.
And why is he so tolerant towards all these people? Like, if like Calvin was friends with like a bunch of like, no offense, but they're kind of weirdos, I'd be like, what the heck? You can hang out with him, but like, I'm not gonna hang out with him too.
I was gonna say, I almost kind of like that. Do you like that like energy that like he's the person who can kind of, because it is such like an insular group, right? Greendale is its like own insular weird thing, and then there's this weird group within it, right? Do you like him as like the person who can kind of speak some sense No? Okay.
He cheated on Shirley. So he's already sort of docked down a point in my book when he comes. It's like, if it was someone who didn't already have that like history with the character, maybe, but he does. So
I don't think they did enough with it this season, but I do like the idea of like Shirley sort of being this like high and mighty person who is like very open with the group about like, it's not her flaw, right? But just something in her life that didn't go right, because she can be very judgmental, right? There's a whole like part of an episode, the Pierce in the hospital episode, like her whole thing is how judgmental she is. Like, I don't think they did anything with it, but I like the idea of like her having Andre around and that making her, it's a certain amount of like vulnerability, right? Because he is like this thing that went wrong in her life, and she's like willing to open up in the group in that way. I don't really think they ever like go there with it, but like, I don't know, just some of the things he says to Jeff about like being a man or not being a man, just like being a good person and like admitting your mistakes. He has a good little speech at the end of 12, and then he has another good little speech at the end of 18. I think did you ever watch The Cosby Show?
No.
Do you know that he's the son from The Cosby Show? The guy who Malcolm Jamal Warner?
No.
Oh, so he's Theo on The Cosby Show. He plays Theo Huxtable. And Theo is this sort of like, because the rest of his siblings are girls. I think it's 4 girls and 1 guy. And he sort of has like a lot of like energy that his father struggles to sort of like rein in and point in the right direction. And so I think part of my like attraction to that character is like sort of seeing him develop from like this like skinny, energetic kid that like kind of is trying to figure it out and getting it wrong a lot of times, to like this like kind of big, broad guy who's like, you know, very like thoughtful and contemplative in a show that like isn't filled with characters like that. I don't know. I think part of my attraction is coming from like knowing what he like his other roles were, especially his role as Theo. Speaking of that, or I guess, did you have any other episodes? You said the drugs episode, the paintball episode. Did you have anything you wanted to say about those ones, or?
Not really.
The only other one I kind of wanted to point out was the Clips show, the like flashback one, episode 21, when they're
where they're all like going through like this, the flashbacks.
Yeah, I don't know. What did you think about that one?
I like it,
because that ends up kind of being an important episode, right? We learn what actually happened to Annie's pens. We learned that the monkey was taking them and hiding them in the vent. So we learned what happened to Annie's pens. Chang starts crawling through the vents, which is where he's going to live for a large portion of the next season. the scene when he's like oiling himself up and then he like takes like 2 steps and it cuts away, but he like dives and you just hear him like sliding down the thing kills me every time. I like that episode because, again, sort of getting at what we were saying before, like I think the thing Community does so well in not all of its ideas are like new, right? Like this season they run a lot of things back, right? Like they have another Christmas episode, they do another movie spoof episode, they do paintball again, they do there are things that they sort of, or they do another like Abed movie episode as well, right? There are things that they run back, but they're just like never out of ideas, right? They're not just running back the same thing. They always figure out like a completely new and unique way to do something that they have, not just like sitcoms have been doing forever, but like something they specifically have already done before. And so the Clips episode, as like, it's literally just people in a room, right? It's like, it's kind of another Bottle episode where they're stuck in a room making a diorama and you're seeing all of these adventures that we like haven't seen before. And it's kind of like the characters are reflecting on the season and trying to like figure out, oh, was this like a good season, or like was this like, did we have a good time, did we have a bad time, what things went well, what things went bad. And I like the idea of like, you know, some of them are painting it as like it was kind of dark. Jeff and Britta are trying to be like, no, all these like good things happen, and sort of just like playing around, right? It's the, you know, people love the show because they say it's meta, right? But it's, and that's like, this is a really good episode where it's literally playing around with what a clip show is and the like how a TV show can manipulate you to like feel one way about everything that happened or to feel a different way, right? Because characters are literally doing that to each other. And then we also get the revelation that Jeff and Britta have been sleeping together.
Gross.
And Abed like secretly was like or he like didn't know he had the clues, but like he was in the right places all season to like figure it out. So yeah, I like that one. It like it kind of like snuck up on me when I was like watching up. I was like, oh, this is like good, and they're doing something interesting here. I got a few more questions. So we got some new characters sort of integrated in the second half of the season. We were introduced to Magnitude. Did you catch what his name means? I never caught this until I watched it this time. Do you know what Magnitude stands for?
His name means something?
Yeah, it's like 2 words put together. Troy says it at one point, and I never heard this before, but it's magnetic attitude.
Oh.
I never knew that. I thought his name was just Magnitude, but Troy says it during the episode.
About where they are running for president?
Yeah, he says it during that episode, yeah. I never knew that, right?
I did not catch that.
We get a lot more of Chang this season, which is great. We get a little bit more of Star Burns. Leonard, we get Neil in the Dungeons and Dragons episode, and then throughout we're introduced to Vicky.
Yeah. I liked like the one part that I actually remember laughing about with Pierce is when he was like, you freak people out. And I just thought that was so funny.
It's so good. And then he like pauses and then he like looks down at the mic and was like, it's your overbite. And everyone's like, come on. It's very good. And then even the ending of that episode, right? She sticks the pencil in his cheek.
Yeah.
Yes, that is you freak people out. It's so sad. We get a little bit of Duncan, but I think he's kind of making his exit. I think this is kind of it for Duncan until season 6. Because I think this is the point when John Oliver starts doing Last Week Tonight and or The Tonight Show and getting quite famous. So I think this might be it for Duncan. I don't know, but like new inclusions, people we saw are starting to see left. Like, what did you think about some of the side characters that we got a little bit more of or less of this season? The Dean, we should include the Dean in there. He starts to become a little bit more central.
Yeah. Who else is there?
I think that's everyone. I don't think I put is it Garrett? The one, there's still some Garrett, right? I don't know. But like, what do you think about, I guess maybe specifically Chang and Duncan, who start becoming a little bit more central? What do you think about their, like, you know, we know they'll end up, like, what did you think about what they kind of got up to?
I didn't think Duncan, I never thought Duncan was that interesting. Like, I forget he's there sometimes. Because, I don't know, I just feel like he's boring. He doesn't really do much.
He's there, like, very early in season 1. But then I think something we even talked about is, like, he kind of is gone pretty quickly. And then it becomes very sporadic. Yeah.
Yeah. But I did like I like Chang. He's cool. I especially like when Cher's having the baby and he's just talking to her about dumb stuff.
Oh, that's good. And there's like the like kind of like nice music. He's talking about like how all the different Changs were born, and like, yeah, that it's like, it's super stupid, but it actually is like, he's like so earnest, like,
Yeah.
you know, they figure out how to like make it nice. What do you think about like, because last season he was a teacher, this season he's like a student, like, I don't know, do you have like a preference in like his role? And then next season the way he interacts with the group is going to be very different. It's going to be a little bit more antagonistic. I don't know, do you have like a favorite sort of like, do you prefer him in one mode versus
I like when he's a student and he's just trying to get out. That's when he's like the most funny.
I think this is another thing I hadn't noticed before, but in that episode where they're making the diorama, did you see they made a little Chang?
Yeah, they made him on the outside.
Yeah, it's so sad. He's literally like looking through the window.
I was waiting for him to notice that.
Gosh, maybe he did notice, and that's why he was like, I'm gonna go into the vents for a season. And yeah, that was so sad. What else do we got here? Okay, so I think we got like we'll take like two more questions to sort of wrap it up. Did you feel like there was any sort of like character growth? Do you feel like any of the characters sort of, we talked about Pierce already, I guess, so aside from Pierce, do you feel like anyone else, did we see any sort of like change or development in like who we understand them to be? I know this is like a little bit tough because we know where the show is going, but did you feel like the show leaned into like, oh, this person's kind of changing or developing at all?
Maybe Jeff with his dad. Or Jeff, like I'm thinking about Jeff with the dad when Pierce was in the hospital, or Jeff talking to Abed in that birthday.
Yeah, we definitely got some of Jeff being moments of like Jeff being super vulnerable in a way that we hadn't before. I think maybe we got it a little bit last season when he loses his apartment. But even then, that's kind of just like, I love that episode when he's living with Abed in the dorm, but it's just kind of like wacky more than anything. We really see him like freaking out, thinking about his dad and like being honest. Some of the things I love. Oh, we should talk about that for a second. I think I have a question here. We should talk about that episode with Abed, but like, Abed's reaction when he realizes, like, did you catch Abed's face when he's like, Jeff just told me something he shouldn't have told me? Because Abed knows he's like playing a prank on him. It's amazing. But yeah, I think we see Jeff being a little bit vulnerable. The show kind of in the paintball one, right? Something we talked about when we talked about the first half of the season was like, oh, they're sort of turning Troy into a little bit more of like a leader, right? He's sort of challenging the group dynamic with like where Jeff is, right? Or Jeff kind of saying everything, because in the paintball episode he's sort of the one who steps up and like say, okay, we're doing this and we're not doing this, and then him and Jeff kind of have a little like back and forth about it. So we saw some of that one in season, or in the first half of the season, and they sort of pick it up right at the end in the paintball episode. So yeah, I think we're sort of seeing some like more facets of them. Something I think just to sort of keep an eye on is like, I think they're kind of planting the seeds a little bit for Troy's eventual like exit. And we'll talk about sort of like that episode and kind of like, why do we think Troy does that in that moment when we get there? But like, I think we see a couple times in these episodes, Troy trying to like define himself outside, or like figuring out how to define himself like away from Abed, right? I think about like the dancing one where he's like, suddenly I'm surrounded by normal people and like me and Abed are always just like being goofy or whatever, right? Or just like playing pretend, and like suddenly things have to be like very serious, right? So he invents that story about his like uncle. And I think we see that a few times this in the season as a whole. Troy sort of trying to figure out like, who am, like, I know who I am with Abed. That's like, I love being that person. Like that's probably who he really is, but like trying to figure out who he is outside of that, because he knows, right? Troy more than Abed knows that can't go on forever. So I think we see a little bit of that, especially I mean, not really, but Troy when who's the guy shows up, the Reading Rainbow guy shows up, and Troy just doesn't.
LeVar Burton.
Did you ever watch Reading Rainbow? Was that no? You never came home after school on PBS? No. I watched Reading Rainbow quite a bit, so it's like funny to see, because he's like such a like a nice, just like a nice person, and like see Troy sort of freaked out by him, right? But like his whole thing is like he doesn't want to meet his heroes, right? He doesn't want to disappoint them.
That's so funny because like I totally understand.
Yeah, right.
We're like, remember we were for going to see Hassan Minaj, and I was like, what if? Well, I wasn't worried about disappointing him. I was like, I don't want to meet him in person. What if I'm disappointed?
yeah, right. So Troy's like, yeah, absolutely, and Troy's like channeling that in the most like extra way possible, where he literally can't say a word. Yeah, right. I think Troy's like has a certain amount of anxiety. I don't know about anxiety, but just like fear about like him measuring up to other people, right? And like he knows who he is with Abed. Does he know who he is with everyone else, right? And so I think we see that come out in certain moments. The talking about that Abed episode is, do you feel like, I don't know, like I don't know, maybe we have to like see more, but do you have any thoughts about like who you think like the best actor on the show is at this point?
I don't know how to tell if someone's a good actor or not. I know if they're like bad, but I don't know if they're good. Like, who's a good actor? Like, I just saw Don't Worry, Darling, like Florence Pugh. I liked her. People say she's a good actor, but I don't know how that's different than, like, next to Harry Styles. I wasn't exactly sure what he was doing wrong.
My answer at this point would be Abed, would be Danny Pudi. And the thing I think about for that is, like, when he's doing that scene, when he's doing that whole episode with Jeff, right? Like Abed he's being normal is one thing, and suddenly he's like being normal. But even in his being normal, he has to sort of be able to switch back and forth between like his normal self and his Abed self, right? Because like the moment Jeff tells him that he like called a 1-800 like sex hotline and told him he was like a super overweight guy and like, do you still love him? Like you see it like flash over Abed's face for a second that like he almost breaks. He's like, Jeff just told me something and I'm playing this prank on him and he can't find out. Like, I don't know, like, I guess that's what I mean. Like it's I feel like his performance is it can be more complicated. He's capable of like having a very complicated performance like that. And the show doesn't really ask him to that often, but it can be that if he wants it to. And I just like, none of the other characters ever really have to like do that, I guess. And so like, maybe like the best actor, but like, I don't know, Danny Pudi can kind of do anything, or at least on this show he can. I guess maybe is the better way to say it. Yeah, I think to wrap it up, like kind of, again, we've talked a little about, we know where the show is going. Do you think this is the peak? Do you think season 2 is the peak, or is there stuff that you're really looking forward to in future seasons?
I'm not looking forward to when Troy leaves.
No, I think that's season 4. I think that's season 4.
I do think that this is like my favorite time in the show, because it's just like I really like Troy and Abed just being Troy and Abed, and like I get like character development, everything. Like Troy has to like gotta go his own way, High School Musical style, but like I really like them together. So I'm really just enjoying this. So when they do start to sort of go apart, it'll be sad.
Well, it's even gonna happen a little bit next season, right? With all the air conditioner repair stuff, right? They're gonna sort of be, I think this might be peak Troy and Abed. I think you're probably right with that, because I mean, we'll talk about it, right? I think in the next season, is that when they move in together, right? And there's a little bit of like the real world encroaching on them in a way that makes for some interesting episodes, and like gets the show away probably from what we like the best, which is them being in Greendale, being like goofy and like having a good time. But yeah, I think that's like, I think that's really good observation. I think this is, if it's not the peak of the show, it is definitely peak Troy and Abed for sure. Yeah. All right, well, I think we'll just go straight into it. We had a little break there. Do you have one, or do you want me to go first?
You go first.
Okay, my one shot is a new TV show on Disney Plus called Andor. I kind of want to ask you to watch this, but I like...
No.
Do you remember when we went and saw Rogue One?
Yeah.
Yeah. This show is the prequel to that movie.
What?
Does that make it any more interesting?
No.
So do you remember in that movie there was the guy and the droid, the guy and the big tall black droid?
Yeah. Well, I don't remember the guy, but I remember the droid.
His guy that he went around with, that was Cassian Andor, and this show is all about Cassian Andor and how he gets introduced to the rebellion, right? Because then he is the guy who ends up recruiting Jyn Erso, and then spoilers, everyone dies at the end of that movie. But yeah, so it's just all about how there's sort of flashbacks to when he was a kid, but most of it is when it's about 5 years before Rogue One, right? So he's like an adult, he's trying to sort of scrape together a living on this planet. He's a little bit of like not a hustler, but he owes a lot of people money. He owes a lot of different people money, and he's made promises to a lot of different people that he can't keep. And so he's trying to balance all of that. And yeah, it's just like, it's really interesting. There's no lightsabers, there's no stormtroopers. It does not have the typical Star Wars things that you think of when you think of Star Wars, right? There's no Darth Vader. There's none of that like big sort of bombastic stuff. It's like a show about like people living their lives on these different planets and trying to plan a rebellion and like, what does that look like in a very physical, or in a very sort of like the planning and the logistics and all the things that go into that, instead of just like spaceships and lightsabers and laser fights and whatever. So it's interesting. Angela's not into it, but
is it with the same guy?
It's the same guy, yeah.
Oh, I mean, I liked him.
I mean, I would say, if you have time, I know you're super busy, but if you have time at some point, maybe just watch an episode. I think.
How long are the episodes and what are they on?
They're on Disney Plus. Episodes are 35 to 40 minutes. Yeah. But
okay.
All right. What is your one more thing?
So my friend suggested me this podcast, and we're actually going to go see them do a live podcast because they're coming to Madison sometime in November. So it's kind of funny because she suggested it to me and I never listened to it. And then she was like, hey, they're coming to town. And I was like, let's get tickets. And then I had to start listening to it. So I was like, ooh, really hope I like it. And I do. It's called Violating Community Guidelines. Have you heard of it?
No, I never heard of it.
It's funny, so it's probably not something you're interested in.
Yes, because I'm boring and boring.
You're just like listening to sad things in video games. It is basically about... okay, here. Let me read you the whatchamacallit.
You said it's called Violating Community Guidelines?
Yes, with Brittany Broski and Sarah Schwar.
Her last name is Broski.
Yeah, so you know.
I don't know if that's amazing or unfortunate.
So she's probably really funny. She was probably bullied, so that means she's probably funny.
Yeah, she probably did get bullied.
But they just like, they're two people who are like very much online, so they make lots of jokes that I understand, which I appreciate. And they just like talk about like just like internet things. So like last week they talked about like true crime because like there was like the Dahmer show that was coming out, and and then like last time before that they're talking about like, sorority TikTok, and then like e-boys and e-girls, and like I'm still kind of like figuring out what the format is, but it sounds like they have a bunch of editors go and do like actual research about these topics, and then they like read it out loud, and then they make some funny little jokes. So it's like informative, but also, and I'm gonna see them in November.
That could actually be interesting. So it feels like they're learning something, or it feels like they're experts? They are learning something. They're like we're interested in this, and so let's read this thing that like our people put together, and they're like, oh, interesting, blah 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 blah. Yeah, but then they like also do little jokes, which is fun. I think that's way better, like, because I've tried to like listen to I forget what it was called. I tried to listen to a new podcast recently that was like, it was about the internet. It was these three people who are like, one's like an actor, one's like an Instagram person, and then I forget what the third one did. And like they have a good rapport with each other and everything, but like they're kind of, it's like very off the cuff, and that thing where like they're kind of talking like they're experts, but it's very obvious they're not. I don't know. It just kind of ended up being like a little bit frustrating. So I like the idea that like it sounds like they're pretty transparent about like this is a learning experience for them as well. Yeah.
The only thing I don't like is that Brittany burps a lot, and that's pretty disgusting.
Oh, just like into the mic.
Yeah, it's like it's really gross.
She's the one with the last name Broski.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that would annoy me as well. Is it like at least a once per episode? Is it like a running bit at this point?
Yeah, I think it is.
All right. Well, to each their own, I guess. All right. That is called Violating Community Guidelines. And you're going to go see, they're going to do a live show in Madison?
Yeah, November.
Coming up. So not too far away. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. That brings us to the end of the show for today. Thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Comically podcast. You can follow Angela on Goodreads by searching Angela Glowacki. You can find her on Letterboxd by searching congli, CONGLI, or on Twitter by searching @congli was taken. That's CONGLI was taken. You can follow me on Twitter by searching @Joey Glowacki. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred podcast listening app. All reviews are greatly appreciated and help our show grow. You can get in touch with us via email by sending your feedback or questions to podcast@comicsly.com. You can listen and give a thumbs up to episodes of the show on the Comicsly YouTube channel. You can find our channel by searching Comicsly on YouTube or following the link in the show notes. There you can also find past streams from our Twitch channel along with other great videos. The music you heard in this episode is the song Don't Ever Forget by Mecca Imperfect. You can find their music on YouTube and Bandcamp. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.